When I sit back and I look at the church, I say, oh my gosh, what have we done? What have we done? We've kicked the theologians out. We've kicked the scholars out. We've kicked all the smart people out because they're too smart and too academic and they talk too much and too fast for us. We've kicked those people out. Now the church is left in crisis. And this is a dire time. We're in the 21st century. This is the biggest moment of the church's life. Here we are entering into a new century. We just passed the second decade. We're going into the third decade of the 21st century. We have no theologians. We have no scholars. We have nobody representing the church. And yet the church has all these big questions and nobody is there to answer it. Yo, welcome back to another Bible study with me. My name is Adam Jordan Clark, and today we are going over Matthew chapter 28. For those of you who are landing on this video for the very first time, hello, welcome to my channel. This is a Bible study channel where we take the Bible seriously and we do legit Bible studies. The three things that we focus on here are history, theology, and spirituality. So if you're interested in any of those topics, and if you're looking for a serious Bible study that actually takes the Bible seriously, then go ahead and click subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Go ahead and like it and comment below and tell me about how you found this video. Also, let me just tell you that we're in Matthew chapter 28 today, and we've been doing a series on the entire Gospel of Matthew. And given the fact that there's only 28 chapters in Matthew's Gospel, and today we're going over chapter 28, tells you that we're at the end of the study here. But good news is that we're going to be opening up another book tomorrow or the day after, and we're going to be going through the Gospel of Mark. We're going to do the same thing that we've done in this series, which is go through every single chapter and study it and talk about it and try to look for things like history and theology and spirituality, because our goal in this channel is to learn more about the Bible, increase our knowledge of the Bible, and ultimately learn how to live a better Christian life. So if you're looking for that, go ahead and click subscribe. And if you like that, then go ahead and give this video a like. Go ahead and give it a thumbs up. But today we're going over Matthew chapter 28. And unlike the previous chapters, this chapter is actually very, very, very short. It's probably one of the shortest chapters in Matthew's Gospel. It's about 20 verses. And this is the big stuff. Basically, we've read the Gospel all the way up to this point, and this is the finale. This is the moment we've been waiting for. This is the best part of the Gospel, actually. This is where he brings it all together and says, Shazam! Here's why I wrote this book. And in all actuality, if you've been with us for the past couple of videos for chapter 26 and 27 and now 28, when you look at those chapters, you can easily just say, okay, well, Matthew could have cut out all the other stuff and just pretty much went with this stuff, because this is pretty much what his gospel led up to. It's actually about chapter 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, and 28. That's the meat of his gospel. That's where the whole story just takes off. Everything before that is just a bunch of stories and teachings and parables and, stuff that just doesn't really matter. I'm joking. But no, seriously, it's just stuff that's, hey, whatever, it doesn't really matter from Matthew's perspective. But he uses that stuff to kind of draw you in. You read these stories of Jesus being a great miracle worker, and he's healing people, and people are getting saved, and he's preaching the gospel, and people are coming to follow him, and all this cool stuff's happening. Then the gospel starts picking up speed, and about chapter 10 is when it starts going up in elevation, and things get really, really, really intense. And by the time you get to chapter 23, all of a sudden Jesus goes from the nice dude who's saying, hey, peace and love, and he's saying, I'm going to kill you people. And so he tells the Jews, I'm going to kill you people. And all hell breaks loose. And everybody gets all pissed off. And then chapter 4, his disciples take him away. And they say, Lord, what are you talking about? We thought you were a peace and loving man. And now all of a sudden you're talking about killing people? He says, that's right. Not one stone will be left upon another. And so he says, Jerusalem's going to be destroyed. And all these other buildings are going to be destroyed with it. That's what he does. And then chapter 25 is the extension of that, which is basically some parables of saying, look, when I come back, here's all the stuff that's going to happen. There's going to be people who think that I haven't come back yet, and I'm going to surprise them like a thief in the night. Then you get to chapter 26, and the Jews say, you know what? This guy's done said some bad stuff about us. We hate this dude, and we're going to have him killed. So what do? They go out and they have him killed. And we read about Judas and how Judas was apparently had a hand in this, and he betrayed Jesus. And we talked about some issues about that. And ultimately, we read yesterday about how Jesus was crucified, and we talked about crucifixion. So if you didn't watch that video, you can go and watch it by clicking up here. So it was great. It was a great video. We talked a lot about how people died on a cross and what the Romans did, and pretty much all the stuff that your church never talks to you about. We also talked about some problems too. Also some stuff with the resurrection I mentioned to you in that video. Because in this video, in this chapter, Jesus is going to rise from the dead. He's going to come up out of the grave. But in the last one, we talked about the resurrection and how important it is to understand the resurrection. But the point is, you can't have a resurrection unless you have a tomb, and you can't have a tomb unless you have a dead Jesus. Dead Jesus that's on the cross, that is. So you got to have a dead Jesus. You got to make sure Jesus is dead. We talked about this briefly in the other video about how there are some good theories out there that maybe Jesus didn't die. So in order to have a resurrection, you got to have a dead Jesus, and I explained that in the last video. So if you ever get upset with me always talking about Jesus died, I always say that. I never say he rose from the dead. I always say he died. He died. We're going to read about the death of Jesus. The Christians get all pissed off at me, especially the churchy ones. They're all like, oh my God, why would you die? Because they think I'm being mean or something. And I'm like, guys, you don't understand. You don't understand. You can't have a resurrection without a dead body. You need a dead Jesus. Jesus has to die. He has to die. And you, as a person who understands doctrine and you understand theology, you have to emphasize that Jesus died. It can't just be about his resurrection, because you can't have a resurrection unless you have a dead Jesus. So you got to be able to prove that Jesus died in order to prove that he rose from the dead. You can't rise from the dead if you never died. So you can watch that video. It's up here. So it'll be a great video for you to watch, or it'll be linked below or whatever. You'll be able to find it. So in Matthew chapter 27, it's called The Crucifixion of Jesus. Awesome video. Great video, I should say. It was an awesome video. Anyways, let's go ahead and jump into Matthew chapter 28. But before we do, here's an ungodly, ugly picture. And the good news for you is that this is the last time you're going to be seeing this ugly picture. Because for those of you who have followed this series, you know that I put this picture up in every single one of these videos because I think it's funny to put an ugly picture in the middle of this video. And also, I should mention, if you haven't noticed, my little cold thing or whatever I had, sickness, flu, whatever type of disease I had, has obviously went away because the past couple of videos I've had to do while I was pretty sick. And maybe I didn't seem that quite as sick to you, but to me, I felt really horrible. And so now, obviously, I feel a lot better. So hopefully, this video will be a lot better, maybe a little bit more energetic. But we'll find out. So this is Matthew chapter 28, and this is the first 15 verses. And after this, we're going to go over the Great Commission, which is the last part. It's on a separate slide. But what we're going to do is just go ahead and read this entire passage, and then we're going to talk about it. Starting in verse 1. After the Sabbath at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and, going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and they became like dead men. Then the angel said to the woman, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He is not here, but he is risen, just as he said. Come and see the very place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Now, I have told you. So the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them. Greetings, he said. They came to him, collapsed at his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, where I will see them. While the women were on their way, some of the guards went into the city and reported to the chief priests everything that had happened. When the chief priests had met with the elders and devised a plan, they gave the soldiers a large sum of money, telling them, You are to say his disciples came during the night and stole him away while we were sleeping. If this report gets out to the governor, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble. So the soldiers took the money and did as they were instructed, and this story has been widely circulated among the Jews to this very day. Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Then Jesus came to them and said, All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always, even to the end of the age. That is the entire reading of Matthew chapter 28. And for us, for our sake, we can confidently and certainly and say with 100% certainty that we have read the entire Gospel of Matthew. Or at least I have. I've read it and you got to be along for the journey. It's been a great time. We've learned a lot of stuff. Some of the early videos really were crazy, and now this is even going to get better. But let me just tell you something. There's a lot of stuff in here that I really want to talk about. The big thing that I want to talk about is here in verse 15 where it says, So the soldiers took the money and did as they were instructed. And this story has been widely circulated among the Jews to this day. Now, let's talk about this passage. I mentioned in the previous video that we did on Matthew chapter 28 that Matthew is combating the idea that Jesus' body was stolen. Okay? So I sort of tried to lay out in a very simple way some of the problems that surround the story of Jesus dying on the cross and being taken off the cross and being placed in a tomb and then rising from the dead and also appearing to people as well. This is these are very hard issues to understand. That's number one. Number two, there are some problems historically. Okay, so what I'm going to tell you is this. This issue is not black and white. And I know that when you go to church, your pastor or whoever, they're going to tell you it is black and white. Guys, look, straight up, this is not a black and white issue. That's number one. Number two, if you fall into the deception that it is black and white, you are going to be severely mistaken. You will pay for that. You will pay for that mistake. Okay? Trust me, you will pay for that mistake. This is an issue that you really need to understand. Okay, this is, and let me also tell you this as well. This is not an apologetic issue. I know that the people on the internet will just go on and on and on and on and on and on about how the resurrection is an apologetic issue. This is not an apologetic issue. This has nothing to do with apologetics. Okay, this has to do with history, and it has to do with theology. Okay, and it has to do with lots of other stuff as well. But we won't get into those things because this YouTube channel is not really geared toward those types of things. Primarily what we focus on here is history, theology, and spirituality. And it just so happens that two of those things are on our list. It has to do with the resurrection, which is the theology and the history. So, first of all, I mentioned in the last video that in order to have a resurrected Jesus, you got to have a dead Jesus. Okay? And the other thing that I mentioned is Matthew, the guy who wrote this gospel. Okay? The dude who wrote this gospel. He is combating this early church belief, which we're seeing here in this passage with the Jews, which is this idea that somebody came and stole the body, right? So in other words, here's what happened, just to give you a backdrop of what happened. The disciples apparently see Jesus, and it deeply affects them, and it deeply changes them. They have this new conviction, and so they go around telling everybody that Jesus rose from the dead. That is a historical fact, okay? Whether or not Jesus rose from the dead, that's a totally different matter. In fact, it actually doesn't really matter for the sake of this conversation. I know it's kind of bizarre, but seriously, you got to hang with me. This is very complex stuff to understand, and I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. The resurrection of Jesus is one issue. The witnesses is a totally different issue. Okay, these are not the same things. The fact that the disciples came to believe in the resurrection and the fact of Jesus' resurrection are two entirely different issues. Okay, they are not the same. And this is what your church is going to mess up, and this is why so many people get confused over this thing, is that they're going to tell you that they are the same thing. They're not. It's a very important historical point to understand. There's the resurrection of Jesus, and then there's what the disciples believed. All historians, whether Christian or atheist or secular or agnostic or whatever they are, all biblical scholars are going to tell you that the disciples definitely believed that Jesus rose from the dead. Now, why did they believe that Jesus rose from the dead is the issue where everybody starts going, we don't know. There are two popular theories. The first one is that Jesus rose from the dead, because that's the only one to go off of, really. The second one is that they hallucinated, that Peter, James, John, and Andrew, and whoever the other ones were, they had a vision or hallucinated, or they thought in their brain that Jesus came to see them. And here's what I'll tell you. The hallucination theory is a good theory, okay? And I'm going to teach you something very important here, guys. Very important. It's a lesson of wisdom, all right? You can have a really, really good theory and it not be true. And the hallucination theory is a really, really, really good theory. You know why? Because dead people don't rise from the dead. Okay? It's a fact. Dead people don't rise from the dead. Once you die, that's it. You're dead. Okay? But the disciples came to this belief that Jesus was dead and then he rose again. So how do we explain it? Well, the hallucination theory basically says that the disciples were so grieved by the loss of Jesus because he suddenly died. Nobody thought that Jesus would die. Okay, I know that when you read through the gospel, he's predicting the death. He's predicting his own death. We read through all that here in Matthew's gospel. And the fact that those statements are there kind of leads you to believe that Jesus probably never predicted his death. I know that's hard to understand, but don't worry about it. We'll talk about it some other time. The point is that Jesus probably didn't predict his death, and the disciples, either way, even if Jesus did predict his death, the way that Matthew writes about it, he says that the disciples didn't understand it. They didn't even accept that he was going to die. So it doesn't matter whether or not you think Jesus said it or didn't say it. That doesn't matter. The point is that the disciples, they did not believe that Jesus was going to die. Not only did they not believe it, but when he did die, they were shocked. It happened on a sudden, we're just sitting here chilling and bam, they come and arrest him and kill him the next day. That's a shock. And they ran. They were afraid for their lives. So it was very sudden to them, right? Well, this gives good reason to believe that they were deeply grieved. They were deeply affected by this. They heartbroken over it. And this is why the hallucination theory came about, because we know that when people are close to one another and their loved one dies, sometimes they'll hallucinate and think that this person came to see them after they died. And this is why some historians have said, well, maybe Jesus hallucinated. Or maybe the disciples hallucinated about Jesus coming. And what I'll tell you is this, it's a good theory. It's a very good theory. I'm not denying that. I mean, it's a very good theory, and it is up there right next to the resurrection. I'm being honest with you in terms of rationality, okay? If you're going to believe the resurrection of Jesus, you have just enough reason and evidence to believe the hallucination theory. Okay? Let's just get that out of the way. Now, here's the problem with the hallucination theory. There's more than one person who apparently saw Jesus. And we know that the disciples scattered. They didn't come back together and meet up. They all scattered. And apparently they all had independent hallucinations, if you will. If they had hallucinations, they all had independent hallucinations of the same guy. That's a big problem. If it were one guy, maybe two people, and they saw Jesus come back, and I would believe a hallucination theory. But the fact that it's more than two people, the fact that it's more than three people, it's probably 10 or 12, maybe 15 people, leads me to believe that they probably were not hallucinating. So I don't really go with a hallucination theory. I go with either an I don't know answer or I go with Jesus rose from the dead. That's what I go with. Because, I think critically about these things. I have my own personal faith. I have my own personal beliefs, but I'm also very critical in these types of areas. And I'll tell you that the hallucination theory is a good theory. So what I'm trying to tell you is that when somebody talks to you, somebody who knows what they're talking about, that is. I'm not talking about some person on the internet. Okay, I'm not talking about somebody who read one book on the issue that was written for a layman audience. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a real theologian, a real scholar, somebody who's experienced in this, somebody who really knows what they're talking about. I mean, legit people here, guys. I'm not talking about some blogger on the internet. I'm talking about legit people, okay? People who have studied this stuff legitimately. You get what I'm saying? Okay, legit people here, the competent people, all right? When you talk to those types of people, you have to understand that, first of all, they know what they're talking about. That's number one. Whether they're on the resurrection side or they're on the hallucination side, it doesn't matter. These guys are experts, and they know what they're talking about, and they've read more about this stuff than you do. They've studied this stuff more than you have, and they really know what they're talking about. Okay, and chances are, you're probably not a scholar. Chances are you probably didn't go to a university and study. Chances are you probably don't know anything about biblical studies at all. Okay, you don't know anything about New Testament studies at all. Chances are, okay, at an academic level. And you stick somebody in the room who knows this stuff, and they're teaching at universities or whatever it is, and you put another person in the room who doesn't know anything, that conversation is going to turn out very badly. So what I'm trying to tell you is that you have that element, and you need to understand that element, that when people talk about a hallucination theory, you have two types of people. First of all, you have the guy who has no idea what he's talking about. So get rid of him. Then you have the guy who really does know what he's talking about. And the dude that really knows what he's talking about knows everything that I just told you. Okay? And those dudes come out swinging because they know their stuff. They know their stuff hardcore. If you don't believe me, go find some of them. Go find some scholars who advocate a hallucination theory and read what they've written on it. You will be surprised. In fact, you will probably come to a belief or some type of state of questioning. If you're a believer in the resurrection, you'll come to some place in your faith or in your thoughts where you say, well, wait a second. It actually is probable that the hallucination theory is correct, or maybe it's true. And that's what I'm trying to explain to you, is that it's a good theory. Okay? When you go to church, people are going to say, the hallucination theory, it's not a good idea. No, it's a good idea. Okay? It may not be the right idea, but it's a good idea. And it does make sense. There's some problems with it. I'm not advocating for it either, so don't get all upset. But it's a good idea. And if you really want to be a good student of the Bible, what you have to learn how to do, this is a very important skill. You must learn how to recognize good ideas. Doesn't matter if you agree with them or not. You have to be able to recognize good ideas, and you have to give credit where credit is due. If somebody comes out with a great theory, and it is a great theory, and you disagree with it, you need to say, look, it's a great theory. I disagree with it, but it's a great theory. It's up there in the top 2. Most of the time in the Bible, there's only like 2 theories, right? Most of the time. Sometimes there's like 12 or 100, but in this case, there's only about 2. There's some other ones, but the 2 ones is the Jesus rose from the dead and the hallucination theory. And it's really hard to say, where the scholarly consensus is on this matter. I mean, nobody really knows. I mean, quite frankly, this is one of those problems where there's just enough reason to believe that it happened as it is to believe that it didn't happen. Because the biggest problem that you have to explain is not the resurrection itself, but why the disciples came to believe it. That's the biggest problem. I'm sorry, but like the idea that they had a vision and this vision convinced, here's what I'm trying to say. I could believe that they had a vision or hallucinated. I could believe that. But to think that vision was so powerful that it caused all of these guys to completely change their mind about everything. If they left Jesus, keep that in mind. They left Jesus and they ran away. All of a sudden, he comes back to them, apparently in a vision or in a hallucination, and they change their mind entirely. They have a radical transformation. And then they go out and start telling everybody that he rose from the dead. That is it's one thing to have a vision. It's a totally different thing to act upon that vision and eventually become a martyr for it. They're all killed for preaching this message, and they know they're going to be killed. That's very problematic. It's very hard to explain from a hallucination theory. It's very hard to argue historically, in my opinion. It's very hard to argue that this vision that we really don't know anything about was so powerful that it forced them to go preaching that Jesus rose from the dead. I mean, that's one crazy, crazy idea. And I just told you a few minutes ago, it's a good idea. It is a good idea, but there's some problems with it. All right. On the other hand, we have the resurrection, which is basically he rose from the dead. And then he showed up and said, hey, dudes, how you doing? Or whatever he said. The biggest problem with this idea is that dead people don't rise from the dead. Once you're dead, you're dead. That's it. You're dead. You don't come back to life. And so how do we explain a dead person rising from the dead? And I understand so many people are like, well, dude, you just said it yourself. Dead people, would rise from the dead. That's what raising the dead means. I understand. That's not what I'm talking about, though. What I'm talking about is explaining this historically. A little bit of a problem. And again, if it were not a problem, because it is a problem, but if it were not a problem, you wouldn't have a theory of hallucination. Every scholar would say, well, yeah, of course he rose from the dead. We're able to explain it historically. We know it's true. Every historian, every scholar would say that, but they're not. Why? Because it's hard to explain how something happens when we know it doesn't happen. We know for a fact dead people do not rise from the dead. It's a fact. If you die right now, you're not coming back to life. You're going to stay dead. All right? Getting rid of the idea of resuscitation, of course. You're going to die. You're going to stay dead. You're not coming back to life. But somebody says that you died and you came back to life. Well, we know you didn't come back to life, so we had this story and it's telling us otherwise. So what do we do? How do we explain it? That's the problem. And it's very important that you understand this problem. Not for apologetics. Apologetics, shemologetics. I don't care about that. I'm not an apologist. I don't agree with apologists. I don't care about apologetics. It's not for me. All right. I think that God's big enough to defend himself. He does not need some tiny little human trying to speak for him. I think that if he wrote the Bible and if it's really a perfect book, it can defend itself. Truth will always prevail. If there's truth in the Bible, you don't need somebody to defend it. It's already defending itself. I don't agree with apologetics. But let me tell you this. I think the resurrection is a better idea to believe. And what you notice is, as you read through the rest of the New Testament, what you'll realize is this. The resurrection is the foundation of Christianity. Period, pure and simple, it is. In order to be a Christian, you have to believe in the resurrection. Romans chapter 10 makes this very clear. It says, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. What does that tell you? Well, it tells you that the resurrection is central to Christianity. Your sins cannot be forgiven. Your sins cannot be taken away unless you believe in the resurrection, unless the resurrection actually happens. So you can't have a vision. You can't have a hallucination, because if it was a hallucination, you don't have your sins taken away, because it never happens. Okay? Now, of course, that's not my reasoning for denying it. That's a theological point, denying the hallucination theory. My reason for denying it is that there are some big holes in it, and I think that those holes are irreconcilable, actually. But it doesn't change the fact that I think it's a good theory. I think it's a good theory. If you can fix those problems, I'll probably believe it, okay? But I don't think you can fix those problems. I think that they're way too big. But the point is that the resurrection is central to Christianity. And what you'll find is that in the New Testament, everything is about the resurrection. Mostly everything is about the resurrection, or it's based on the resurrection. And if you notice, if you look at the church today, one of the things that has just absolutely gone missing is the resurrection. This is why I've spent a lot of time emphasizing a little bit of a scholarly perspective here on the resurrection, because basically it's like this. When you encounter non-believers, they're most likely just going to go to this hallucination theory, which, of course, I'm preparing you for a future event. When you encounter non-believers who are going to present a hallucination theory, what you need to understand is that chances are they're probably not theologians or scholars or historians. They're probably people who have never studied at a university, have no idea what they're talking about, and the best thing they've ever done is read one or two articles on Wikipedia or read some dude's book, maybe the first chapter. Throw it out there. In other words, most people are not very well read. Most people are not. They just don't. You know, they'll read a headline and create an entire belief upon a headline that they read off of social media. That's what people do these days. They're not really well read. They don't do real research. Also, by the way, people will Google stuff and they'll say, I've done some research. It's like, dude, Googling something is not research. That's Googling something. Okay? Let's get that out of the way. So what I'm trying to tell you is that you're going to encounter people who have no idea what they're talking about, but yet they're going to pretend like they know what they're talking about. All right? You don't need to worry about those people because they don't know what they're talking about. The people you need to worry about are the ones who know what they're talking about. These are the people who are real theologians, real scholars, real historians. They've been to real universities. They've been to real divinity schools. They've really studied this stuff. They've actually done real research. Those are the people you need to be scared of, because those people know what they're talking about. Okay? They know what they're talking about. And I will promise you this, no matter what church you go to, your church has not prepared you to handle those types of people. Okay? I'm serious. I know the apologists, the amateur apologists on the internet, they're going to tell you, oh, you don't need to do that. Listen, folks. I'm trying to save you a lot of heartache here. This is good wisdom. This is good wisdom. If you ever encounter somebody who knows what they're talking about, okay, we're talking a real theologian, real scholar here, you know, real historian. When you encounter that person, the best thing for you to do is not challenge it and move on to something else. You're going to get demolished because you just don't know as much as they do. You just don't. Unless you've been trained in that stuff, unless you've studied under these people, unless you've done real research, unless you actually have real degrees in this stuff, I'm telling you, you're going to get slaughtered. You're going to get destroyed. These people know what they're talking about, okay? And they know their stuff. And they not only know their stuff, but they know everybody else's stuff, because this is what they've done their whole life. They study everything. All the stuff you think you know, they know it way better than you do. They actually know where it came from, and you don't. That's a problem. So take the wisdom and utilize the advice. Learn how to talk to the right people and learn how to avoid conversations with the wrong people. Okay, most people, most unbelievers are going to rely on secondhand, third-hand, maybe even fourth-hand information, and it's going to come from people who are not legit. Okay, and unfortunately, the believers kind of do the same thing. They get information from secondhand, third-hand, fourth-hand people who don't know anything most of the time. And they just, it's a disaster. It really is a disaster. When I sit back and I look at the church, I say, oh my gosh, what have we done? What have we done? We've kicked the theologians out. We've kicked the scholars out. We've kicked all the smart people out because they're too smart and too academic and they talk too much and too fast for us. We've kicked those people out. Now the church is left in crisis. And this is a dire time. We're in the 21st century. This is the biggest moment of the church's life. Here we are entering into a new century. We just passed the second decade. We're going into the third decade of the 21st century. We have no theologians. We have no scholars. We have nobody representing the church. And yet the church has all these big questions and nobody is there to answer it. And people continually want to badmouth scholars. It's incredible to me. You people, you church people, you hate what scholars have to say, but when you need a scholar, you're running off to find one. What is wrong with you? That doesn't make any sense. It makes no sense to me. You hate scholars because of what they have to say, because they don't always agree with your fundamentalist beliefs or your dogmatic beliefs. But when you need them to help you, all of a sudden, you need a scholar. Charismatics are a great example. They hate scholars. They hate theologians. They don't want anything to do with them. Some of them go to the link and say, we don't even need theology. All we need is Jesus. All we need is the Holy Spirit, which, of course, is a theological statement, shows how much they know. But they always bad-mouthing the theologians and scholars and people who study the Bible and the people who read a lot of books. They're always bad-mouthing those people. But by golly, you know what? When they need somebody to help them prove that the gifts of the Spirit are still operating today, you know where they go? They go knocking on every door of every theologian that leans their way. They go looking for a Craig Keener or something or a Michael Brown and say, hey, people, we need your help. And you spent all these years bad-mouthing these people, and all of a sudden, when you need help, you go banging on their door. Look, I'm sorry. You church people need to fix your attitudes. You really need to fix your attitudes. You really need to step back and realize the catastrophe that you've caused, number one, and you really need to realize the crisis that the church is in. There's no history in the church. There's no theology in the church. There's no real spirituality in the church. There's no growth in the church. There's absolutely nothing important in the church. People know their numbers. Pastors know their numbers about their church. They know how many dollars are in the offering plate and how many people come waltzing in the door every Sunday, but they don't know how many people are reading their Bibles, how many people are growing, how much people are learning about theology. They have no way of measuring those numbers. Absolutely lost. And you know, it's amazing. Here's the big problem. Unbelief is rising. For good reason, too. But it's rising. Not only is the numbers of unbelievers rising, but their knowledge and education is rising as well. It's a sad state when you have non-believers who know more about the Bible than the people sitting in church who call themselves Christians. That's a problem, my friends. That's a massive problem. And you look at the pastors of America. Where are they at? Well, they're sitting in their big churches acting like celebrities, and they're not fixing the problems that exist in their churches. We have a big problem on our hands, folks. A very, very, very big problem. We're only going to solve it by allowing theologians to come back to the church, by allowing scholars to come back to the church, by allowing education to come back to the church, by allowing theology and history and real truth to return to the church. But we don't want that to happen because we know if we bring truth back into the church, guess what's going to happen? The people are going to leave. And you have to make a choice, big people, big pastor people, you church folk, you got to make a decision. Which do we want? Do we want truth in our churches or do we want numbers? Which do we want? Which do we care about? Do we care about building great churches or do we care about building great people? Because you can't have both. You either got to build great people and focus on that, or you got to focus on building great churches. And unfortunately, the churches in America are focused on building great buildings, great churches, not great people. My name is Adam Jordan Clark, and this has been a Bible study with me on Matthew chapter 18. We're done with this series. We've done the entire gospel of Matthew. If you have not watched the whole series, go watch it. Click on the YouTube channel, go into the playlist on the Gospel of Matthew and watch all 28 chapters. We talk about all kinds of amazing stuff. It's been great. It's been fun. I hope it's been fun for you. We're going to be talking about all kinds of new series this year. We're going to be talking about the life of Paul, some practical Christian advice, some stuff about education, and we're also going to be doing more Bible studies with me, because you get to do a Bible study with me when we do Bible studies with me, and it's great. It's fun. I very much enjoy them. Obviously, as you can tell, I just have a blast because this is one of my favorite things to do. I love reading the Bible, and I love teaching from the Bible, and it's just very fun to me. It's exhilarating. I think that's a word, but it's a word now. But it's been fun. I hope that you have enjoyed. I hope you learned something in this stuff, and because our goal here is to teach people. Our goal is to learn. Our goal is to increase in biblical knowledge and start having conversations that other people are not having. To talk about the things you're not talking about in your Bible study. To talk about the things that you're not talking about in church, that your pastor's not talking about. In order to get knowledge, because knowledge is power, in order to get knowledge, you have to have the willpower to gain that knowledge. My name's Adam Jordan Clark, and as always, I will see you in the next video. If you like this video and want to know more, you can hit the subscribe button for more videos. If you have a question or a comment, or maybe you just like to say something or express your opinion, go ahead and comment that below. And like the video if you like the video, because liking the video is always a good thing when you like the video. My name is Adam Jordan Clark, and you can find out more about me if you like at my website, adamjordanclark.com. And as always, I will see you in the next video.